Yeah, correct. And the thing is that obviously art is a really big kind of box.
Right.
To put many things are being put under the banner of art. The kind of art that I was engaged with and I'm still engaged with is experimental in nature. It's non-commercial. It's not about creating a warm, fuzzy feeling. Actually, Yonat and I, and I suppose many other artists, talks about the fact that the areas that we are trying to explore are those we're trying to probe those areas that we feel uncomfortable about, because obviously there's something there that we need to investigate further. So if I feel comfortable about what I'm doing, I'm not interested in that as much. Yeah, so it's not so much art as therapy as some art forms are, or it's really art as probing, as a I refer to it often as a problem-seeking endeavor. Yeah, so we're trying to problematize the world around us. And this is something, art has a long tradition, especially in the 20th century. They're promising that by consuming their products, we're going to heal the earth in some way. So it's abundance with restoratory kind of consequences there, that somehow we're going to make the world a better place if we consume more of those products. It's a form of magical thinking, because the world doesn't work like that. Lab-grown meat is a symptom and it's not a solution, because the problem that we have is obviously that meat consumption is bad. The current modes of meat productions are really nasty. And what we do, we invest a lot of money in continuing this mindset and just making it even more specific. But there's a really easy solution to that, and that's just reduce our meat consumption, not even become vegetarians. If we somehow live this kind of in this totally disassociated world, we create so much more damage without any form of awareness that I think, again, would create a much more problematic and create this rift to such an extent that the damage that we cause to the world around us is going to be much, much more significant.
This is such a fascinating field for me to understand the ethics of bioengineering and tissue culture and all of these things. And I read through your book as well as your partner Yonat Zer's PhD thesis and so on. Why this field? Why did you get in this field?
So the origin was basically me studying product design in the 90s, and coming from a very ecological perspective. I grew up in a farm. I was always interested in life. I actually majored in biology in high school, but thought that design, or actually I didn't even want to be a designer, I must say. I wanted to be an artist, but I thought that I should be practical about my life. So I studied design and product design, and I tried to, since the very beginning, try to combine biology and design. I believed then, which I don't really believe now, but that might, as our conversation progresses, we might get to there, that if we move our culture from a culture of manufacturing to a culture of growing, if we start to work with living biological systems in order to make the made world around us, it might change kind of our relationship to the made environment, also change our relationship to the concept that we know as nature. So the idea was that we can start to design living biological products. And I wrote my thesis about it in the mid-90s, around the very same time that, I don't know if you remember, the appearance of the mouse with the human ear growing on from its back, which really struck me as finally the ability of humans to sculpt with living biological material reached kind of a level that made me interested. Where else can we take it? Obviously, the mouse with ear on its back was a scientific demonstration of a new technology at the time called tissue engineering. So even though in my thesis I wrote about many different types of...
I'm sorry, this is your PhD thesis?
No, it was my honors thesis. So actually, in Australia, you can do like 3 years of undergraduate and you do 1 year research, which is the honors thesis. And which was very much a speculative design project. So at the time, the term speculative design didn't even exist.
Speculative design?
Yeah, it's a speculative design is a field that I suppose started in the early 2000s mainly by Tony Dunn and Fiona Robbie from, at the time they were at the Royal College of Arts in London. And the idea there was to look at how design can start to speculate about how new technologies are going to have impact, how they're going to impact human life and beyond. And I wrote my thesis in the 90s, but it was very much, I suppose, in kind of the lineage of speculative design. And I was speculating a future where designers would be called upon to design living biological products. And even then, I realized that I'm much more interested by the questions that this prospect raises rather than the solutions that it might offer. So I decided to continue my exploration as an artist because, especially at the time, that was, again, before speculative design became something that I thought that art is a really good vehicle to explore open-ended questions and probe into the ethical issues rather than provide solutions or think about the ways in which this knowledge can be employed in a utilitarian way. I think the strength of art, and I still believe so, is the fact that it's not utilitarian, that it really is about creating those ambiguous situations where people are confronted by that, are challenged, and so their perceptions around the world are being challenged, and art does a really good job at that in many cases. So I decided to become an artist. I decided to look at one technology in particular at the time, and that was tissue engineering. And again, going back to the idea of the mouse with earons spec and how striking that image was. And I wanted to explore this technology further. So in 1996, together with Yonat Zur, we set up an artistic research project, which had a very simple, or it sounded simple, but a very complex question, and that is the use of living biological material, and especially living tissue, can be seen as a valid form of artistic expression. So what kind of questions we can generate if we are starting to use living tissue as a medium? And what was quite interesting, it's basically a situation where the life itself and the medium that we use, the tissue, is both the object and the subject of our artistic exploration. Yeah? So in most cases, art is representational, so you basically use other media to represent something. In this case, and this is true to many biological arts projects that followed, the material that you're using is also the subject of your exploration. And I was very lucky that I was able to find a scientist at the University of Western Australia that was very open to allow me to come in and learn the techniques, and that became a very important part of the whole way in which our project operated, and then later on with SymbioticA as well. The idea that artists should come in the lab and explore those new forms of the manipulation of life through direct experiential engagement. To put it simply, contemporary biology provides new ways to manipulate matter. In this case, it's a very problematic, in a sense, matter of life itself. So in a sense, biotechnology, bioengineering, biomedical research creates a new palette of possibilities for artistic research and production of artworks, for better or for worse. And this is exactly what I was trying to explore.
So you said art can be used to provoke thought, or I guess that's my summary of what you were
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, yes.
Yeah, and I've been getting into art quite a bit since I stepped away from my corporate career a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And these are questions I'm constantly trying to answer, I guess, to some degree. It's just fun. I do it because it gives me a sense of joy when I'm doing it. Yeah. But are you saying, I guess, this is more of a personal question, is that it is one of the most effective vehicles if you want to try and do that sort of thing, provoking thought and stuff?
Yeah, correct. And the thing is that obviously art is a really big kind of box.
Right.
To put many things are being put under the banner of art. The kind of art that I was engaged with, and I'm still engaged with, is experimental in nature. It's non-commercial. It's not about creating a warm, fuzzy feeling. Actually, Yonat and I, and I suppose many other artists, talks about the fact that the areas that we are trying to explore are those exactly we're trying to probe those areas that we feel uncomfortable about, because obviously there's something there that we need to investigate further. So if I feel comfortable about what I'm doing, I'm not interested in that as much. Yeah, so it's not so much art as therapy as some art forms are, or it's really art as probing, as a I refer to it often as a problem-seeking endeavor. Yeah, so we're trying to problematize the world around us, and this is something art has a long tradition, especially in the 20th century, of doing so. Yeah, so it's not art that is there to necessarily illustrate in a very didactic way what's going on in the world. It's an art that actually probes and problematizes, and what we talk about in terms of culturally scrutinized. So the problem that we see, especially in the area that we are working, which can be a great example in the sense of the fact that we are, the main interest that I have with my work is life itself and how our relationship to this a very big concept of what life is being challenged by what's happening within the sciences and the engineering of life. And as an artist, I want to take it out and kind of liberate that from the confines of the biomedical world, of the biotechnological world, and put it within a cultural context for people to contemplate. Because I think the decisions that are currently being made in regard to how we relate to life and what we're doing to life are either driven by scientific curiosity, by commercial reasons, by kind of the notion of technological progress, but the public at large doesn't really have much say, and also doesn't really have much comprehension of what is actually happening. So tissue culture, I felt, was a really great example, because tissue culture was going on for, scientists started to isolate living cells from complex organisms and growing them outside of the body of that animal or of that organism since the late 19th century. But especially when I started, especially in kind of the early 90s or the mid 90s, when I would talk to people about it, they were not even aware that it's happening. This idea of the sense that the body can be taken apart and parts of the body can be sustained alive for long durations of time, even though it was going on for 100 years, now it's more than that. Now it's almost 40 years. People are not thinking about it, and now it's becoming quite a relevant question, in particular with what we see with things like lab-grown meats and all of the other forms of attempts to grow animal parts without animals, that it's becoming an acute question in regard to what kind of relationship we are going to have with the living world around us, if this is what we choose to do to other living beings. And so in a sense, when United and myself started in the 90s, we were proposing those questions as a kind of maybe in a somewhat predictive way. Now a lot of our work is actually responding to the fact that it's becoming commonplace, and there's a growing number of places where you can find parts of living organisms that are grown and being used outside of the original context, which is the body where they once existed in.
Yeah, I mean, isn't there a popular notion that life eats life? I mean, that's sort of a common trope that's used, and I guess in that context, we kind of, at least the way I look at it is it's kind of a justification of humanity to say, all right, we're going to slaughter these animals, we're going to do animal farming and things like that, because that's just the way the systems are created and stuff like that. Are you, through your work, are you trying to kind of dispel that notion and be more like thoughtful and nuanced about what is life and what it means to, kill another animal or kill another living being? Or are you maybe provoking us to think even broader as to what is food, for example, if we need sustenance, things like that? Like what I guess what are you driving at ultimately here?
Yeah, no, those are all great points and great questions, and that's exactly kind of the areas that I'm interested in probing, because one of the things is the fact that we're using this one term life to describe such a wide range of phenomena. I'm not trying to be prescriptive or directive in the way I present my work as art, because the whole idea is to bring people into a situation where they have to kind of should realize that their long-held beliefs are somehow incompatible with what they're being confronted with. But it's not up to me as an artist to tell them how to think about it. They have to then figure it out. But here's a great example. Yeah, so this is how really things started for me and Yonat. Is the very first lab that we worked in was an eye research institute, and the scientist, the chief scientist, was trying to develop artificial corneas. So he was developing different types of. He was a chemist, so he was trying to develop different types of materials to see if they are compatible with the eye, and that he can make those artificial corneas from. And in order to do so, we had to grow cells, and in this case, there were cells that were taken from eyes of rabbits. Yeah, so this layer of skin that kind of covers your eye. Those, so he needed to source those cells from somewhere, and the lab where we worked in, once a week they would get a cardboard box full of half rabbits' heads. Yeah. We were told the rabbits were slaughtered in the morning for food. So, people eat rabbits. So obviously they don't eat the heads. So the heads were then sent to a brain research institute. There they would cut the heads in half, take the brains out. And our lab, the Eye Research Institute, would only get those cardboard boxes with those half rabbits' heads around lunchtime. They would then take their eyes out and put them in antibiotic solution. And only more than 24 hours after the animal was dead, we learned how to isolate living viable cells out of those rabbits' eyes. And that put us in a really strange situation, because what we are confronted with when we saw the cardboard box was with pieces of dead meat. You can't be more dead than being a half head with no brains kind of sitting in a cardboard box. But 24 hours later, you could get living cells out of it. And we then did for quite a few of other experiments throughout our careers, where we were able to actually isolate viable cells that were living from animals that were dead for up to 2 weeks. And I know that there were some experiments that even pushed that further. So the idea of life becomes quite an interesting one, because we know that the rabbits are dead, but the cells are alive. But the life of the cells was somewhat different than the life of the rabbit. Yeah, and there's many different ways to think about it, but we decided to talk about it in the terms of the semi-living. Yeah, so that there's different gradients of life, and there's like life is not an on-off switch. There's no, we talk about life and death as if they are very deterministic and very clear and obvious, but that's not really the case. It's a much more, as you said, like a much more nuanced kind of notion. I started this trip. So 3 weeks ago, I was in a conference in Denmark. I gave a keynote in a conference which was called Art Bio, and it was basically a bunch of scientists trying to make artificial biology. So there is a growing number, and again, we live in such an interesting time in the sense that there's so much science around life from the molecular, from how complex a molecular assembly should be before we start to refer to it as being alive, all the way to the end of life, or the way of how life can continue beyond what we perceive to be death. Yeah, so there's this huge spectrum of things, and we as a culture, we as a society have very little in terms of reference to be able to actually comprehend it. So my little contribution as an artist is to look exactly at those areas that I feel that we have very little cultural language to deal with what I experience, parking myself in labs for almost 30 years now. I keep on coming out from the lab with examples of things that, in some cases, many of the scientists would see as very trivial and mundane, but when you put it in a cultural context, and when we as a society and a culture need to start to come to terms with it, realize that we don't really have the tools to do so. So again, as an artist, I bring non-verbal ways of starting a conversation. And this is again why the art is so important, because art is really good at trying to, I suppose, give form to that we have no words to describe. In order to start the conversation.
Yeah, but it's also wrapped up in like so much in like religion and religious beliefs and things like that, right?
Exactly. And that's kind of the thing is like not dissing any form of religious belief, but it doesn't really give us the right tools to be able to deal with what's happening. And I gave a talk just a few days ago in Boston, and one of the examples is the fact that this tension between how we are being confronted now by developments that we have no terms of reference to describe can result in kind of yearning to those good old days where life was simple, where we knew exactly what we're doing, when we knew kind of what the rules are to some extent. And right. That's, that might not be the right direction to go as well, yearning to some nostalgic past that never really existed in order to simplify kind of what we're being assaulted by or confronted by is not the way to deal with what we actually need to deal with, and with making those decisions, because to some extent, those decisions are being made regardless of how some people's religious beliefs might tell them. So we need to create more. So art can help raising those awareness and to that we need to discuss.
Yeah, very true. I'm sure you've heard of this series called Black Mirror on Netflix.
Yes, yeah.
That one show about this guy creating these synthetic not AI, but these synthetic life forms in his conscious mind. So he would put this little device on his forehead, on his temple, and then create all these beings. And then and those beings are sentient in some sense. They experience psychological pain and things along those lines. And they're suffering in that environment. They're suffering. And that stuck with me forever. I mean, it's been 5 or 6 years since I've seen it. And it's such an interesting way to think then, like, oh my God, am I stepping on things? I mean, South Park did this, right? Like South Park had this episode about head lice and how these head lice, this guy applies shampoo on his hair and he's just killing all these families and tribes of head lice and things like that. And it's, anyway, I just...
No, those are really great examples. I think what's interesting, obviously, we are, there's a long tradition of human imagination of trying to imagine things, and Black Mirror is very much a great example of I suppose, some of the directions that speculative design that I discussed before was kind of trying to point and trying to come up with those scenarios in order for us to be able to respond to what might be coming even before it's happening. I think what's interesting with this type of work that I'm involved with, the idea is that I'm developing working prototypes. It's not about imagining. It's like what I'm bringing from the lab into the gallery are actual things. They're not representations of things. They're not mediated. They're not a product of kind of making using different types of media in order to make what you imagine visible. It's actually bringing the actual thing into the gallery and confronting the audience with it. So that's taking it into a different sphere to some extent, but it also creates something quite interesting, and that's a more realistic expectations in regard to what's possible. So, with all due respect and with all what we discussed, there's still a lot of obstacles to achieve kind of the end game in the sense of what many of the scientists want to do. But within the public imaginary, there's some perception. So, for example, the mouse with Oron spec, it's almost 30 years it hit the media. It was shown for the very first time on BBC back in 1995. The technology that was there to make the ear on the back of the mouse is still not. We still don't have humans that have ears that has been grown in such a way. But the perception was that here we are about to reach an era where our body spare parts would wait for us on shelves in hospitals, and if we need a new organ, those smart scientists would be able to grow it to us. We're not even close to that. So by going into the lab and doing it myself, I also acutely aware of the limitations of those technologies.
Are you in favor of that, growing tissue and growing organs in the lab? What is your stance on that?
I believe that Western medicine is one of the best forms of medicine that humans invented. It's problematic. There's some issues around it that, but it is evidence-based. evidence-based.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that Western science does really well is isolating the subject of your investigation from the rest of its context. So a lot of what we do in Western science and Western medicine is kind of a form of decontextualized thinking in order to be able to focus on the problem at hand without understanding the larger context in which those problems occur or those solutions are trying to solve. So there are some shortfalls, but I think that still it's the best system that humans came up with to date. There's always a question of in what context the knowledge is being applied. Yeah. So what does it mean? Let's speculate. Let's say that we did develop a way in which we can grow body spare parts. Is that opening up a situation where only parts of society would have access to this technology and other parts would not? That's open a situation that a possibility that people would start to abuse their bodies to such an extent that because they can always go and just get a spare part and just replace it. Continue. So there's so you see how I'm thinking. I'm thinking about the potential problems that there's amazing solutions, but my brain works in such a way that I'll always try to see what's the problem with that solution. Well, what is this solution is symptomatic of? Now, if all of the world would think like me, we're not going to get very far. But I think there's a place for some people in the world to be allowed, and this is again why art is important, to be allowed to be problem seekers rather than problem solvers. I think the issue that we're facing now is that we might face a form of a dark age where people are not allowed to critically engage with the world around us or with the solutions that are being offered, and then we might find ourselves actually in quite a problematic situation again. So again, I'm not advocating this way of thinking for everyone, but I think that there's a place for people to become problem seekers. Yeah.
What do you mean by people are not being allowed to go? Why this start?
There's a growing anti-intellectualism happening in the world. There's universities are shutting down departments that are engaging in critical thinking. There's a perception that some areas of the humanities are not important anymore. There's the world is becoming more and more. I don't know what's your background, but so hopefully I won't offend you. But the world seems to be driven now by managers and engineers that are fulfilling a really important function in society. But if that's the only way of thinking about how we deal with the world, I think humanities are not going to go anywhere good in a sense. So we need to allow for a more intellectual, more critical way of engaging. We need to allow for university departments to actually be there in order to investigate the problems that are can be caused by some of the solutions that are being offered by the managers and the engineers. Yeah. So we need to find a balance. And I think that now we live in a time where the balance seems to be tilting towards the fact that everyone needs to do something that would make the world a better place. But if we don't have the people who would say, yeah, better, but better for whom, or better, what are the downstream impact of this idea of better, and what kind of problems this better is going to generate, we will find ourselves potentially in a dire situation. So I think it's just about where we put the balance, and the balance at the moment seems to be tilting towards this anti-intellectual, anti-critical notion of human existence, and in the most important time of human existence, I would say.
What do you think? I mean, I have two follow-up questions to that. Yeah. Like, can you think of a time when we used to be like that, where humanities was given a lot of credence as much as other fields were?
Yeah, we needed a great shock. So after Second World War, this is also, you see the flourishing of, all right, first of all, I suppose the Renaissance and the notion that we can't just rely on the scriptures, that there is an acknowledgement that human knowledge is not complete and the scriptures are not the only answer. Yeah, so that was a major kind of breach that allowed modern science and our current society to exist, because the idea was we need to question. We don't have all of the answers, and it's not that all of the answers are contained within this body of knowledge. We need to open new bodies of knowledge in order to do that. And secondly, after the Second World War, where you saw a huge rise in critical theory. You saw a huge rise in obviously things around kind of feminist thinking, and that allowed kind of start to problematize some of the issues that were not kind of almost untouched, and also the rise of what was referred to as non-utilitarian research. So my current job at my university, I'm the director of the Institute of Advanced Studies at the University of Western Australia. This is a very, very new job that I started. The institute existed for 20 years, but the original institute was actually formed, Institute of Advanced Studies was formed in Princeton actually in the 1930s, and to a large extent to allow people to escape Europe as Europe became more and more of an unhospitable place for some people, and namely someone like Einstein that was had to escape Europe because of his Jewish origin. And the interesting thing is that the founding document of that Institute of Advanced Studies, and if you've seen Oppenheimer, actually Oppenheimer became the director of the Institute post-World War. But the founding document is an essay that was written by the founding director, which his name kind of escapes me now, and it was titled "The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge," and basically talking about the need to engage in open, curiosity-based research without any notion that there will be any useful outcome, and though that's the basis of so much of the innovation that we experience now. This is the basis. If you would know what you're looking for, you'll never find those things that would allow you for this paradigm shift or for those jumps in our understanding of the world. And what we see now is that in many cases, those opportunities are almost non-existing. Funding bodies wouldn't fund or wouldn't put enough resources into open-ended research with no perceived outcome. There's very, very little areas of human knowledge where we are actually allowed to explore knowledge for knowledge's sake. And then on the other hand, also we're not allowed to be, or there's very little resources allowed. And as I said, university departments are actually shutting down, where people, very smart people are actually spending their time critiquing and analyzing what's going on in the world in order for us to learn from history, to learn from where the things might take us. Because it doesn't really seem as a productive pursuit.
Yeah. I can certainly relate, Oron, on that. Like I used to be an engineer for almost 20 years, and
okay,
I noticed sort of a gradual, in about the last 8 or 10 years, I noticed a gradual shift from, there was a lot of respect for graybeards in the company. The people who had experience and people, they just didn't have a product they were putting out. They were there to work on knowledge and help mentor people, and they didn't really have any profit motive. It was they were meant to be sort of this ambient source of knowledge and ambient source of sparking new ideas and stuff. And I saw that growing up. There was a more like high emphasis on this just profit motive, the next Q1 and so on. And a lot of that dried up the creative thinking. The stuff that brought us to this point was sort of like looked down upon, this kind of tinkering attitude. And another point I wanted to kind of add to that was I read this book, which was very interesting. It's called The Myth of the Objective. And I forget the name of the author. I read it like 6 months ago, and it really changed my whole perception. Anyway, the central point of the book is that when you go after a very clear objective, rarely humanity has achieved that end goal. It's always the serendipity that plays into the picture, and then things coalesce, and then they come into being. Like I think one of the examples he states is that the Wright brothers, were just there at the right time. If humanity wanted to invent flight, like we would not start designing a wing. We would not start designing an IC engine. These are all things that happened along the way, and then as serendipity kind of brought all these together, and then we had flight. Anyway, that I was just adding to what you were saying. I found it very interesting. You said that too.
Yeah. No, exactly. Thanks for kind of corroborating that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I was, I was reading one of the. I have it here. I'll read this back to you. It's one of the magazines, I guess, and I wanted to get your take on this. It's pretty interesting to me. technology seems to promise us an illusion of a victimless utopia. TCNA argue that this technology-mediated victimless utopia is but a transformation of explicit violence into a hidden impact, one on a much greater scale. As urban culture seems to find it hard to stomach images of real violence as opposed to cinematic and constructed simulated violence, its obsession with ever-growing consumption inevitably created increasing amount of victims from the ecology to other animals and humans. There is a shift from the red in teeth and claws of nature to a mediated nature. The victims are pushed farther away. They still exist, but are much more implicit. And I was thinking, man, this is such a, I mean, it's just the thing. I mean, it speaks to kind of like a very moral aspect of how, as humanity progresses, as society progresses, our consumerism progresses, and so on. And there's another aspect to this too. I was reading. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. But anyway, I wanted to know your thoughts about this particular thought. It's not a widely held sentiment, at least from what I witness. You know, it's just consumerism is the name of the game, especially the home country of India I come from. These things are rare. I mean, there's Maslow's hierarchy there too, I understand. But I guess, could you speak to this? Like, why, you know, we talk about these victims, like building a lab meat and leather jackets in the lab and so on. I'm trying to think what I want to ask you about this. Like, what is, why do we have to moralize this stuff? I guess, why do you moralize this stuff?
Right, this is great. Thank you so much for touching on that, because this is really what I've been doing, and this is the works that I'm working on at the moment are developing this idea even further. But I'll start by just giving you a very simple example to illustrate kind of the quote that you put forward, and I think that would help make some more sense. Yeah. So
Okay.
in the early 2000s, United myself traveled quite a lot to Spain, and we saw something which was quite strange phenomena in a sense. We saw a correlation, and you know, that's anecdotal, but it is a strange correlation between the increasing resistance to bullfighting in Spain. So, you know, imagine bullfighting, it's extremely violent, extremely explicit, but on the other hand, one can think about it in terms of, obviously it's very small scale, and there's like some strange respect to the animal there. Yeah, so it's not violence for violence sake, it is a ritual that actually pay a lot of respect to the animal, even though the animal is suffering immensely. So there was this resistance to bullfighting that increased, you know, throughout the last 30 years in Spain. At the very same time that we also saw an increase in the opening up of American-style fast food joints, yeah, especially burgers. I won't put the brands, but you can imagine. So as the Spanish culture became more Americanized, they decided to remove the small-scale violence of the bullfighting and this respectful but very violent and explicit form of engagement with bulls, with the much larger scale but much more implicit violence of industrial farming. Yeah, you know, in America, actually, there's laws against showing what's happening in those industrial farms and in slaughterhouses. You're not allowed to see it because that might impact the bottom line of those companies. Yeah. So we are hiding the victims, you know, and then the only way you interact with that bull is as a very abstracted form of, you know, either a burger patty or even the cut meat that doesn't have any resemblance to the original animal from which it was taken. Yeah, so this abstraction of violence and this is obviously very obvious, and this moving from the awareness of what's happening to this bliss, ignorance that allows you to orchestrate violence in a much larger scale, hidden from view. So that's one aspect. But actually, the work that I've been doing lately, and I'm developing, we're going to have a show in LA that is going to touch on it, and I'm actually going to Japan to work on a much larger project, is this idea that all of those new developments around being able to somehow divorce food production from nature itself. Yeah, so this notion that we can grow meat without animals, we can grow plants without soil, we can kind of separate. There's even a company here in the United States called Air Protein that are claiming that they can make meat out of air, which is using atmospheric air in order to feed, and they don't really mention it, but they are basically feeding yeast that then produce. So they're feeding it with methanol, which can be made using a lot of energy out of atmospheric air, and then they use that, and then the yeast would make proteins out of it, and then they would make protein flour out of that, and claim that it's meat or protein that is made out of air. All of those are really amazing and seductive stories. What they do promise us is this form of abundance without consequences, abundance without guilt. Yeah, that somehow we can continue consuming the world around us without feeling bad about it. And actually, many of those companies are even doing more than that. They're promising that by consuming their products, we're going to heal the earth in some way. So it's abundance with restoratory kind of consequences there, that somehow we're going to make the world a better place if we consume more of those products. It's a form of magical thinking, because the world doesn't work like that. There's always resources that are needed. The laboratory is often being portrayed as this magical place that you put, let's say, stem cells on the one hand, and you get like chicken breast on the other end, and there's no resources that are needed.
Yeah.
It's what, obviously in economics, there's a reference to the externalities. Yeah, those things, the costs that cannot be monetized, and therefore they're not ever appearing in the profit and loss spreadsheets of the companies. Yeah, but we all suffer the consequences. The externalities are actually, it's basically the credit for next generations. And what those promises and this way in which technology is actually getting better and better in creating more and more, it's basically obscuring with more and more layers the real costs to the world, the real costs to the environment. So this is what we refer to as metabolic rift technologies. So those are technologies that are actually celebrating this rift between human existence and the metabolic processes of nature itself in the name of sustainability. So it's not just that they are promising us some kind of heaven on earth, it's also promising that we will be able to restore the earth because of that. And this is an extremely problematic proposition, yeah, because what it forces, it prevents us from actually thinking about any other solution that might not be that commercially well rewarding, but might be much better for the environment. So the lab-grown meat is a great example. I think this is like a perfect example of this kind of magical thinking. Yeah. So we are aware of the fact that the current modes of meat productions are really bad and really harmful to the environment. And actually, it raises another question that, or thought that kind of goes back to why my original idea that if we somehow move from from making and manufacturing goods to growing them is somehow going to be more environmentally friendly. It's not really the case. Industrial farming is basically taking a biological system and industrializing it. And we now know how damaging it is to the environment. The fact that cows are biological beings doesn't make them environmentally friendly if we grow them on an industrial scale in an industrial way. So first of all, trying to grow meat in the lab, it's taking this mindset even one step further from monocultures of cows in feeding lots in an industrial scale. Now they're talking about monoculture of cells, of parts of animals in huge kind of fermenters and factories. But anyway, going back to the question, the fact is that lab-grown meat is a symptom and it's not a solution, because the problem that we have is obviously that meat consumption is bad. The current modes of meat productions are really nasty. And what we do, we invest a lot of money in continuing this mindset and just making it even more specific. But there's a really easy solution to that, and that's just reduce our meat consumption, not even become vegetarians. Just, humans were not evolved to eat meat 3 times a day. Those companies want to promise us that we'll be able to somehow continue consuming meat 3 times a day without any impact on the environment. If a fraction of the money that was invested in this industry would have gone towards campaigns of trying to reduce meat consumption, if we would stop subsidizing meat consumption, if our taxpayers' money wouldn't go to support those harmful impact, if meat would actually be costed according to their actual costs, including those environmental externalities, then we might be able to solve the problem without necessarily, because technology is not always the best solution. The behavioral change might be different. Real costing might be another solution. Yeah, but with this current mode of technological determinism and thinking that somehow technology is going to save us, we can't even think about the fact that there are other solutions that are somehow existing outside of this mindset that we all find ourselves in. So again, I'm not here to provide solutions, but I'm here at pointing finger and say,
Okay.
it's not what is being promised to us. It actually has a lot of problems associated with it. And I would add another kind of more, I suppose, ethical issue, and this is something that we are raising with our new work. Those companies and those engineers that are trying to grow not just animal products without animals. There's a paper that was published recently by MIT engineers where they proposed growing wood in the lab. And the idea is that it would make much more sense, if we grow the wood in the lab rather than in the forest. And in that paper, they say this way we'll be able to only grow the things that we are interested in, which is the wood. And we won't have to grow all of those wasteful things and unusable things like roots and leaves. Yeah. There's very little discussion, if at all, in those papers about where the nutrients to grow the wood is coming from. But very likely it would come out of organisms that either have roots or leaves, or some cyanobacteria that produces, that's basically the precursor to plants. And it's the same with lab-grown meat. So they say, why do we need to grow all of the wasteful things? If you want to eat chicken breasts, why do we need things like beaks and feathers and feet? We can just, and it sounds very efficient. The problem is that obviously in order to grow all of those organisms outside of or all of those parts of organisms outside of the animal, or even the tree in this case of the wood, we need to basically create a technological surrogate body to do it. So that's a lot of resources. We're basically outsourcing the functions of the bodies that allow those things to grow to technology. So it might not be the most efficient way of doing it. And obviously there is the nutrients. We need to still feed those things in order for them to grow. It's like you can't, even though there's this company promises like protein out of air, you still have to use a lot of energy to make the atmospheric air into something that those organisms can actually consume. So there's no free lunches. And the problem is that the kind of the narrative is that somehow we found the key for a free lunch, which is a form of magical thinking. It's not really the reality of how kind of the world works and how our existence in the world works. And we should be aware that, yeah, our existence is costly for other beings. So again, going back to the bullfighting, if we look our victim in the eye, we might not be, it might be seen as much crueler way of doing kind of consuming, but at least we are totally aware of the real price that another being have to pay for our existence. If we somehow live this kind of in this totally disassociated world, we create so much more damage without any form of awareness that I think, again, would create a much more problematic and create this rift to such an extent that the damage that we cause to the world around us is going to be much, much more significant.
Yeah, so if I'm reading you right, you're not advocating that we should become vegetarians, but there's this kind of solutions where we could, there's a kind of there are avenues we haven't yet explored. There are things like, like you said, behavioral changes we have to bring in. But that sort of thing requires almost like a societal level enlightenment, right? Like we need to, collectively change our belief systems and structures, which is a really hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I agree, and which makes me quite pessimistic. I can see even with my own work, how my own work that was supposed to be a way to challenge people into thinking about those things is constantly being co-opted in order to promote exactly the same things that I'm kind of pointing a finger at and warning against to some extent. So but again, all I can do as an artist is just put it out there and hope that people would somehow respond to it in a way that would help them to, again, creating awareness and being aware of the world around them, rather than live in this fantasy world that somehow technology is going to somehow solve the problems for us. This notion of kind of nature-free existence, which is being promoted, and as human society became more and more urbanized, so did the damage to nature. Yeah, so there's again a direct correlation between the urbanization. I don't believe in the idea of wilderness, for example, because I think that wherever there's no humans, something bad might happen because no one is there to witness. Yeah, so I think we really need to be around, and but we have to have, and it's not a hippie thing. It's really about the fact that we are in a system here, planet Earth, spaceship Earth, whatever you want to call it,
right.
is a fairly close system. The only thing we get from the outside is the energy from the sun. We need to learn how to manage this resource in a way that actually makes sense, and we can, it's the usual stuff, but you need to constantly remind people, and you need to constantly create awareness, because in many cases, in my conversations with many of those people in this whole industry of cellular agriculture and lab-grown meat and all of those, they're genuinely good people. The people who are really trying to do good in the world. It's not, I'm not criticizing them, but it's the mindset. They can't see beyond that mindset, that somehow what they're doing might not be the right or the right way forward. Let's put it this way. And there's many different arguments as to why they believe that it works, because they don't believe that they can, as you said, it's have to be a systematic shift. And in this case, they're trying to work from within the system, and that might not be the way forward. But I have kids. I want to believe that the world that we're going to live them would be at least as good as the world that we live in. And I'm more and more pessimistic about that as well.
Yeah, I had a question to ask you, and I forgot completely. If, by the way, at any point, if you want to, I know you're a busy person, you have to bail. We'll end the conversation right there, or
no, it's okay. Actually, it seems to, my brain still seems to work even though I have COVID. So yeah, let's see how far I can push it.
Okay, good deal. What was the question? I really. Okay, I'll skip to the next one. Another curiosity one. There's talk about, or rather, something about you. You're running the SymbioticA Institute, which is kind of an interdisciplinary way of solving problems or going about things. Am I characterizing that right?
You said solving problems, and actually, that's exactly what we're not doing.
Okay.
We're no. If I can point. So first of all, SymbioticA is in a really interesting phase at the moment. So it was a research lab based in the biological science department at the University of Western Australia, but it transitioned out, let's put it nicely, out of the university in June this year. So it's currently hibernating, but I am moving it. It's going to be hosted now by the State Art Gallery of Western Australia. So it's going to be a very, very different beast. But what we've done at SymbioticA was to take the type of methodology that Yonatan and myself developed in the 90s of artists coming into labs and experiencing it and working with living biological material as their art form, and open it up and make it into a research lab. And we're based in the biological science department, which made it really unique. Actually, it was the very first lab of its kind in the world, in that we had a level 2 biological lab specifically for artistic research. And the way we defined it was to basically deal with questions around how our relationship to life is changing from the molecular level to the ecological level through direct engagement. So all of the artists, actually, initially we only thought it's going to be artists that would come and do research projects and research residencies with us. Then very quickly we realized that people like philosophers and geographers and ethicists and other disciplines that were interested in what's happening to life but never had access to labs applied to come and do research residencies with us. So it was a very interdisciplinary. We had research groups, we had individual researchers. The idea was the the bottom line was that anyone who comes through Symbiotica needs to spend time in the lab and get their hands wet. Yeah, so for them to have this very direct experiential engagement with different modes of manipulation of life. There was no expectations of outcomes, so which was quite unique, and maybe that's one of the reasons it had to be phased out of a university, because now there's an expectations of outcomes even within research universities. But we, it worked really well. It trained a generation of artists and scholars that otherwise wouldn't have access to labs. And now there's actually quite a few similar initiatives around the world. Most of them are actually based in art and design schools, so they don't have what we used to have, and that's this breadth of knowledge of the scientists, and the fact that I worked really, really hard for many, many years to get the acknowledgement that this type of research is as valid as scientific research. Yeah, so our researchers have, they were basically equal to the scientific researchers in the school we were part of. Now, this is something I'm now trying to do also through the Institute of Advanced Studies. So my role now is really to support interdisciplinary research across the whole university. It's really exciting because it's not just artists and biologists or kind of the life sciences and society and culture. It's across all areas of my university, and my university is very much a very wide, has a wide research. It's basically a general university in the sense that we've got anything from engineering and mining and the hard sciences. There's actually very strong kind of astrophysics part as well, to the humanities. I'm working with the business school as well, and I'm working with all of the other departments at the university, and try to create those interdisciplinary projects with a hope that kind of new knowledge would be generated. Yeah, so the Institute of Advanced Studies is very much geared towards more, I suppose, the problem-solving aspects. Symbiotica was a unique beast in the sense that we were always problem seekers. It was always about this notion of cultural scrutiny through direct engagement. But we did come up with some stuff that was useful, which, it's kind of the interesting thing around what we refer to as the secondary outcomes. So by not looking at solutions, you often find solutions way before anyone else because of the type of questions you're asking. And that's going back to your point about those graybeards, that, those people that are there asking irrelevant questions in order to find irrelevant answers.
Yeah, man. I'm this is such music to my ears, Oron. Like, especially as you're casting your net wide to include all of these disciplines. I mean, I'm increasingly getting convinced that our way to salvation as humanity is through these kind of interdisciplinary dialogue, this kind of conversations and exchange of ideas that has to happen, and cross-pollination and all of these things, and move away from this kind of hyper specialized world that we kind of have. And I think, and my 2 cents is that with AI and things like that that's coming out, which I've been playing around quite a bit with, it's going to make it even more like, because the AI is trained on all of these interdisciplinary things. It understands these things, and it can, me as a average engineer can learn about some diverse field or have a conversation with you, and all of these things. Like, a lot of my preparation work in this podcast came from AI, so I'm really bullish about that whole thing.
I'm a bit skeptic about AI, I must say, because it really depends on kind of what comes in order to see what comes out, and then obviously the whole license to hallucinate, the AI hallucinations. So, and again, this brings us to AI is great as long as we have the critical faculties to be able to discern, what the kind of stuff that it spits out as what's worth our attention and what's not, and that's why I think we need more training in critical thinking than ever before in a time where that seems to kind of be lost. So, I think again, as a tool, it might be an amazing tool as long as we are aware of the limitations. What I've seen, for example, is that at the time where, even before AI, there was no other time where human knowledge was so accessible to us, with the internet and, even with search engines. The really strange example of lab-grown meat. So when Yonat and I grew the first piece of meat in the year 2000, We then found out that there was a Dutch scientist that actually patented a similar technique a couple of years before us. NASA was doing one experiment, but no one was really interested. Actually, when we raised it as a prospect, people were thought it's a crazy idea. But then I actually set up a Google alert on lab-grown meat and all of the other derivatives of that. And for a while, I could set a calendar. Once every 6 months, there would be a news story about it, as if that never happened before. And it went on for about 5 or 6 years. And then it was once every 3 months, there was a story about it. In many cases, the same media outlet, the same story, but as if it never happened before. And all that journalists had to do was to Google it and see there's references. But because it was seen as some kind of a good news story with a potential kind of a short horizon span, before it's being fulfilled, the journalists seem to almost be compiled to tell the story as if they found something that no one else found. And it's like, we have the internet. You can actually Google it. You can actually look for references, and they didn't dare doing it. Then, obviously, the peak was in 2013 when this Dutch scientist, Mark Post, actually in 2012, he did a press conference where he said he's going to grow the first lab-grown burger and he's going to serve it in 2013. And I actually invited him for a cook-off in 2012, which was quite funny. But then he did his thing. 2013, he launched his burger. It was a big press conference with set up like a cooking show. The whole world media was all over it.
Yeah.
Only 2 journalists approached me for comments, because on public record, me and my team were the first to actually eat and document it. And there might have been other people who've grown it, but we've done the first documented event back in 2003 where we've done it. It's on public record. Mark Post actually gave us credit in one of the scientific papers he published before he launched the burger. But from the whole world media, only 2 media outlets approached me to ask for my comment. One was a small rural radio show from Queensland, Australia, and the other was Time magazine. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So what I'm trying to tell you is that even though we have such easily accessible knowledge, before through search engines, now through AI, it seems that we don't really use it right.
Yeah.
There's very few people who actually using
it's a fair point. I definitely take that point. I'm obviously coming at it from a very biased view that as an engineer, I found many different use cases of exploiting it, of doing things that I could never do in the past, or I just didn't have interest in doing. Now it's able to just generate code like that for me, build applications that make me a lot more productive, or bring me up to par with some of my other engineers or other departments in my company, for example.
Yes.
If I needed a particular widget to, I'll give you a quick example. Like last night, I'm really animated when I talk about this. I needed a teleprompter because I was producing another podcast, and I needed to, have a teleprompter that goes up, line by line at a certain pace and blah, blah, blah. So, I have one choice to buy an application, and I'm running off my savings and I want to save my money. So on the other hand, I'm like, I have a $20 subscription to my AI thing. I was like, hey, whip me up a quick teleprompter. It wrote some JavaScript, it wrote some Python script, and bang, it was on my screen. And it was like, holy cow, for peanuts, I was able to create this tool. I was play God in an instant. And therefore I'm a lot biased about it, but I
fair enough. No, and that's a great example of where it's useful. And but you know what it is? It's about you being able to ask the right questions.
Yes, I absolutely, I totally give you that point. Let's see. This is a very important thing that you kept bringing up, the critical thinking aspect, and even the last a couple of podcasts ago, I was talking to a gentleman who's a researcher from Rutgers University, actually talking about misinformation in WhatsApp groups in India, especially as it affects the masses, the perception of the masses, and so on. And because WhatsApp is a kind of a closed, encrypted information service, you really can't monitor it, you can't police it, you can't police bad actors, sending out bad information. So the real solution is critical thinking. We have to have a critically thinking, digital literate population to inoculate ourselves from misinformation. And it's like, so then we have to, again, it's a heavy lifting task, right? You can't, this is a generational thing. If we invest now, maybe in the following generation we have a more critically thinking generation. So so the appeal of such a thing sort of goes away, fizzles out quickly when we say critical thinking, education and stuff. I don't know what, I'm sure you've thought of this. What do you think about that? Like, how do you inject critical thinking? Like, is it we just revamp the educational system? Should we begin at grade 3? What is the solution here?
Yeah, again, I'm not a solutionist, so I don't know if I
Sure,
have.
sure.
But I do believe that it's obviously, and you can see it. You can see countries that had how shall I put it? They had the political leaning leadership that, for their own agenda and their own reasons, decided to remove a lot of critical thinking from the education system. And you see a generation later that the majority of the population is really leaning towards that specific political agenda, because some political agendas are much easier to promote if the public is ignorant. And you might make your political leaning choices, but it can go both ways in a sense. So how you remove educational system from political agendas is the first question, and how you can create a situation where actually it's really about kind of creating, because most political parties wouldn't like their motivations to be questioned, but that's exactly the case. It's like, but it is about strengthening democracy. It's about strengthening the ability of people to be able to make decisions for themselves, but also to be able to make informed decisions. And I don't, I'm actually, I'm not a libertarian. I don't think that we should allow people to do things without, because humans are, we're a herd animal. Regardless, we need to be in society. We need to be part of a group. But the way in which we choose our leaders, and which would then allow us also to choose our life, needs to be better informed. And again, like, the education is the most important thing. A society that doesn't value its education, a society that doesn't pay teachers properly. As you said, I was born in Finland. I spent a lot of time there. I've been visiting there a lot. Teachers are getting into teachers' college in Finland is harder than getting into medical or law school.
Oh, okay.
Because the society the teachers are, being a teacher is kind of one of the best jobs, in a sense, not so much money wise, but the way the society treats and respects those people. And if all countries would actually, and in many cultures it used to be the case, the teachers, the educators of the young, the elders, in a sense, that was their job, were always the most respected members of the community. And it's a shame that we lost it. So, investing in education is not throwing money down the drain. I'm more than happy to pay, 5-10% more tax if I know that it goes to education. I have no issue with it. But I wouldn't leave it to individual philanthropists as well. I think that has to be a community effort of society at large, the state at large. But then in places, I'm sitting now in America, I'll be branded a communist for saying that. Yeah.
Really? I agree. I agree with that. Yeah. That's true. But it makes such intuitive sense. That's the part I don't understand. It's like, really? Is it that hard to comprehend?
Yeah.
Why isn't education so prioritized? Like, I'm totally with you. I keep trying to educate myself and seeing, okay, what are some of the silver bullets we can solve some of the world problems? If I just had to jog through some of the resources we have, and it seems like, well, education is it's such a fundamental, like a bedrock of civilization. It's like, it's how we understand the world. It's
Exactly.
Such a fundamental ingredient of how we understand the world. If we understood the world, maybe we could relate to it better. Maybe we could understand it better, interact with the. Anyway, I'm preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
But I wonder, because I wonder about your audience. I don't know about your podcast audience, but that might help. Might be people that might be able to make a change.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I finished. I'm good.
Even if not my audience, for me, I'm certainly very enlightened after this conversation. So, Oron, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Such a privilege and an honor, and somebody like your stature coming on my podcast. This is the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and yeah, keep me posted.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks, Oron. Have a great evening. I hope you get better soon.
Yeah, I hope so as well.
Have a good evening.